which Goa produces in substantial amounts. In fact, the Indian exports to China, 60% of this include iron ore, mainly coming from Goa. A substantial amount actually coming from Goa to going to China. So there is a huge demand on this front in terms of the iron ore exports. In 2013, Xi Jinping told the POAO Forum that China is going to import $10 trillion worth of raw materials in the next 10 years' time. He also suggested the additional attraction for Goa. He also suggested in this speech that 450 million Chinese will be going abroad in the next 5 years. Currently, last year, about 92 million Chinese went abroad. So in terms of tourism as well, this is a huge destination that China is thinking about, and Goa could prosper in terms of this tourism sector, which is a major kind of contributor to the Goan economy. So I think there is a huge possibility here, both in the iron ore exports as well as in tourism.
Right. You also in your opening comments mentioned about the defense relationship. You talked about the annual defense dialogue. Now we do know that given our own issues that we have, the territorial dispute, other issues in the Indian Ocean, we are not going to reach the level of synergy or interoperability between our two navies or two defense forces as you probably would have with more countries like, for example, America. However, we have our defense minister, Shri Manohar Parrikar, who will be very soon traveling to Japan and possibly next month to Korea. Now, given that Make in India is an important philosophy and defense is going to be a significant component of our self-reliance and modernization going forward, what could be the impact of the visit of our defense minister to these two countries of Japan and South Korea in terms of how Beijing would see this, given their own disputes with those countries?
I think with Japan, the 2+2 dialogue process, the foreign ministries and the defense ministries dialogue that we instituted some years ago, this has been a major event in the India-Japan relations. In fact, apart from Moscow, the only major summit level meeting that we have is with Tokyo. So in other words, this is a kind of robust relationship which is emerging and will have a long-term kind of impact. 3-4 issues are being discussed in the India-Japan relations. Number one, in terms of the maritime cooperation. Number two, in terms of economic and technological exchanges between the two, especially India learning from Japan in the manufacturing and high-tech sectors. Also investments from Japan. I wanted to say that the Japanese have invested $16 billion in India, while China invested $1.1 billion in India. So that's the scale of difference between China and Japan vis-a-vis India. There is also the cooperation related to space programs and the BMD, ballistic missile defense system. And if the Japanese put up their house in order on the amphibious aircraft sales, because that is related partly to their constitutional ban on exports of arms. So if they pass a resolution in the parliament, amend the provisions way back of the 1950s, then possibly the India-Japan defense ties will flower in the future. So this is one area where we have a huge prospect. In terms of South Korea and India, in 2009 we had an MOU in the maritime and defense technology transfers. South Korea and India face similar security challenges vis-a-vis North Korea and vis-a-vis Pakistan respectively. So most of the equipment that South Korea had developed, there is a huge prospect that India could learn from this and follow up as part of the 2009 MOU on defense technology transfer, be it in land systems or in the air systems or in the naval systems. There is a huge possibility between South Korea and India in the defense sector. So the defense minister's proposed visit to these two countries could have substantial advantages for India in the longer term. Well, how China looks at these, I think these are between India and Japan and India and South Korea. When China transferred the nuclear and ballistic missiles to Pakistan, while we protested, the Chinese never listened to India. And when China is transferring arms to India's neighbors like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, or even Nepal, we have had our concerns expressed, but China hardly paid attention to these issues. So I think it would be unfair on the part of China to say India and Japan are improving relations, or India and South Korea are improving relations.
Sure. But in terms of the overall Chinese expanse of the Indian Ocean region and trying to come into our immediate neighborhood, which has led to some suggestions that they're trying to encircle us, could this relationship with Japan and South Korea actually help us dissipate some of these concerns, or they could actually heighten some of these concerns and make China more strident in our immediate neighborhood?
I think India should, regardless of the Chinese participation in the Indian Ocean region or entry into the Indian Ocean region, should go across for the defense ties, because it's mutually beneficial. There is the technology transfer, which is a huge jump in the technological levels that India would learn from the Japanese and the South Koreans. So there is a huge possibility there. I think regardless of the China factor in the Indian Ocean region, India needs to approach these countries. Apart from this, India also needs to explore the Singaporean connection, where there is a huge possibility, and also have to have more substantial contacts with the Southeast Asian countries. Since we have stakes in the South China Sea, there is a need for maritime navy cooperation with these countries in Southeast Asia. It's true that there is an increasing Chinese participation in the Indian Ocean region, reflected in recent visits by Xi Jinping to Sri Lanka and Maldives, but also in terms of the Hambantota, Gwadar, and a string of ports that they plan to build in the Indian Ocean and in Africa, which suggests that we need to have a global response for this rather than a regional response. So in other words, we have to enhance our interaction with the Indian Ocean, as is reflected in Prime Minister Modi's visit to Mauritius, Seychelles and Sri Lanka a week ago, 2 weeks ago. So I think regardless of Chinese role in the Indian Ocean region, India needs to confidently look at the broader picture and evolve stakes with countries which are stable, which are prosperous, which have high technology in both defense as well as in the civilian fields.
You know, another interesting point which I want to again get back to, because economics dominates most issues, has been the role of SEZ, Special Economic Zones, in China's own economic development. I say that because a few years ago there was this major initiative here in Goa to set up some SEZs across different parts of Goa to be able to ramp up Goa's productive capacity, manufacturing capacity. Of course, there was a lot of local resentment because the entire process was not seen to be transparent, and it fell flat in the end. Can you just throw light on what has been the impact of the SEZs in the genesis of China's economic development, and are there any lessons for India to learn in terms of replicating these SEZs in different parts of India, maybe even in Goa in the future?
Well, China had set up nearly 2,000 out of 4,000 special economic zones they planned to. During Hu Jintao's term in 2002 to 12, they wanted to complete 4,000 special economic zones in different parts of China. The special economic zones is a part of the China economic model they adopted from 1990s, 1992 Southern Tour by Deng Xiaoping to Shenzhen, in which the model depends on FDI, by which China had attracted $1.2 trillion so far. Secondly, it includes joint venture companies with multinational companies. Thirdly, it is export processing zone. Fourthly, the state will provide for land for these SEZs and also raw materials, energy and so on. That's the package that China developed out of these special economic zones. Now, some of these became controversial. For instance, in Guangdong province, there is the Wukan uprising. A village in Guangdong province was up in arms against the cadres, Communist Party cadres, acquiring fertile land, and this has become a contentious issue. As you mentioned, the 16 special economic zone proposals in Goa also faced similar problems because there is the local resistance for some of these projects. As you also saw in Nandigram in West Bengal, there was the farmers' protest on the price to be paid, etc., etc. So I think the Indian government needs to carefully look at, because we are a democratic society, unlike in China where there is no kind of accountability for the people. In this case, we need to be cautious about that approach and take into the consideration the people's opinion and set up the special economic zones in areas where it is not detrimental to the people's interests. So I think we need to match this democracy with the special economic zones or economic growth rates.
Since we're coming to the end of our program, I thought we could conclude with probably one question, which really focuses on the people-to-people relationship. If the relationship has to go forward, it has to go beyond the state-to-state relationship. So in terms of people-to-people contact, what all can be done between India and China? And if you could give it to me in brief, because last year they talked about a lot of cultural cooperation, and since Goa is the venue for the International Film Festival, we had a few films from China also make their entry into Goa. So how you think can culture, films and this kind of interface contribute to a bettering of relations between India and China?
With Buddhism spreading to China, there is actually 40% of Chinese believe in Buddhism. This is actually a structural asset for India in terms of expanding the people-to-people contacts. We have, for instance, 80% of Chinese tourists coming to India. Most of them land in the Buddhist places or religious places. So this is another aspect India needs to highlight, and the visa on arrival could possibly contribute to this. Last year, there were about 1,70,000 Chinese who came to India, and 8 lakh Indians went to China. Okay. So that's part of the people-to-people contact, tourism expanding between the two sides. There is also the soft power context where we have this expansion. In 1991, the cultural exchange programs has been instituted. I think we need to rejig the whole program of the cultural exchange, because there is, while the Chinese send these journey to the West epic cultural tropes to India, we keep sending some of the cultural bands. Sometimes it is as Sarkari oriented bands. So I think we need to do a lot in terms of involving NGOs and other groups, civil society groups, to seek explanations from the Indian side and expand the cultural exchange programs between the two.
So thank you very much, Professor Kondapalli. I think everyone would agree we've had a very holistic discussion trying to cover many issues which belong to India and China. And I think one can say that going forward, the India-China relationship will be a very important one. It will be one which has stakes for both countries. And the way in which our political leadership is able to navigate the difficult questions and also harness the tremendous opportunities that lie in this relationship will, I think, be beneficial for both societies. So with this, we come to the end of this first such interview, and we hope to have many more interviews in the future. Thank you.